You're all set.
Excellent. Well, good morning. I guess we'll give it one more minute before it's good morning for me. I'm on the Pacific coast here. Give it another minute to let others join, and then we will start. I'm really excited to be here and see everybody joining in. We have it also live streaming on different platforms, I believe. So it's very exciting. Very good. Well, I guess we can start now. I'll wait for the background noise, the music. There we go. Excellent. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our masterclass on the Global Treaty to End Plastic Pollution. I'm Julie Andersen. I'm the CEO of Plastic Oceans. I'm here with Mark Minneboo. With that, our regional director of Latin America, who's really led quite the regional effort. He's going to talk about with the Chile Plastics Pact, or the Plastics Treaty and the Plastics Pact, which he will go into. We've called it a master class because we were talking about a global treaty to end plastic pollution, and what does that mean? And how are we navigating navigating and including our voices in a plastics treaty that would be the first of its kind, in the sense that it's more complicated than ever before. A global resolution with multiple laws that would really regulate something that is as complex as plastic pollution. I will touch on the different aspects of plastic pollution. What does it mean? Why is it so complex? Mark's going to go into the different regulations that are on the table for discussion at the global level. And then we will go into what does that mean as civil society, as citizens? What does that mean for us? And how do we help to ensure that the laws aren't passed without really understanding the barriers that we all see and feel within our communities on the ground? Because often there's a real disconnect between what is on the top and how it is presented, and then the actual implementation on the ground. And where we represent and want to ensure is inclusion of civil society's voices, the barriers, and how we are going to really be the ones implementing these type of laws. Mark?
Thank you very much, Julie. Before we continue, just explain the house rules today, as this is more of a informal setting. It's not a webinar. Traditionally, webinars more like a big meeting. So I would like to ask everyone to make sure that your microphones are turned off. At the end of the masterclass, we will have some time for some questions and answers. So hopefully there we can dive in deeper and talk a bit more about your local realities. So we want to ask you and invite you to use the chat in the meantime. If you have any questions, and we'll try to moderate as good as we can within the hour that we have for this masterclass to answer your questions. Or if we cannot answer it, at least try to address it, because we know this is a very complicated issue and a multi-stakeholder one. So we don't want to miss out on your local realities. Next slide, please, Javier. So before we start, just want to make sure that everybody understands that this masterclass is being organized as part of our Global Trees and Seas Festival. It's a festival that is taking place in more than 30 communities around the world with reforestation. We have beach cleanups, river cleanups, expert panels, conversations, live music. There's a lot of stuff going on, and you can find more information on treesandseas.earth. So you can also see what other panels do we have the next couple of days. Let me see. Don't see any slides yet. So for some reason, we're not sharing the screen, I guess, from the slide. Let's see if we can.
Oh, no.
I can see the slide. I don't know if anybody else can see the slide, the current slide. Just a question. I see a lot of people saying no. So let's see if our tech support can make sure that
I can see the slides. You all spotlighted with, and the slide is spotlighted as well. Perhaps changing your view on the top.
Okay, Chelsea says looks
Thanks,
better
Chelsea.
now. Thank you, Chelsea.
Well, it was pinned, but now Mark, your face is back where there were slides. So it says pinned by Javier. So I'm not sure.
Okay. Jaco sees it and Michaela sees it. Okay.
All right.
This
Well,
now we officially started, because you can't have a Zoom start without a little bit of technical difficulty.
Exactly. Well, again, so thank you, Julie, for this short introduction. Today, we're going to talk, first of all, just to make sure that we're all on the same starting point. Let's talk a little bit about plastic pollution and why we think, as Plastic Ocean International, it's a systemic problem. Then we dive in a little bit deeper into what is exactly this global treaty to end plastic pollution. Also, what we need to know about the negotiation process that will take place the next 2 years. We'll talk more about some details about the contents of the current resolutions that we have and that are being negotiated. And then we're going to go a bit deeper into why do we need really a global treaty, as there are already so many solutions. With Julie, we'll be discussing that. And of course, not to forget about, okay, but this process seems to be so far away from our local realities. How do we make sure that community voices and the voice of civil society in general also will be heard in this very important process? And of course, there at the end, as you can see, Q&A, we expect also for you to send us your opinions or questions in the chat. Maybe you're already an expert and you can let us know about more how you're involved, or maybe you're still dealing with local plastics problems and you want to know, okay, is this treaty going to do something for your reality or not? So to no further ado, I would like to give the floor to Julie to tell us a bit more about plastic pollution and why it's a systemic problem.
Thank you very much. As maybe some of you know, plastic pollution is a global problem. And this is a global problem because we are seeing plastic pollution from microplastics to macroplastics found literally in every parts of the earth. We are on the Mount Everest down to the Mariana Trench. We are seeing it in our microplastics in our soil and the air. It is everywhere. This is a mismanaged material. And it is a material, though, that has brought about, what I always say, it's democratized the world. And what does that mean? Plastic has contributed to allowing us to ship products and has sterilized products to food packaging, food access, healthcare uses plastic. There are amazing benefits to plastic, but we now know that it also causes pollution. So now we're having this real dual confrontation of something that is both beneficial and extremely problematic. And it is, for all of its benefits in terms of lightweight use and for travel, it has those benefits on reducing carbon emissions for transportation and other social benefits. But we have to deal with the reality of the environmental impact and the social impact that it negative impacts that it causes on the other end. So this is why it really does become the systemic problem of having social and environmental benefits in some capacities, but extremely detrimental ones for the future in terms of how it is being managed. And one of those reasons in terms of how it fits in the systems, why is this? We can produce and distribute plastic anywhere in this world. However, the responsibility of waste management is decentralized, meaning that it is managed by our own communities. So you can, I can buy anything here in California, but I can also travel down to the global south. I can travel to India. I can leave my trash there and it becomes their responsibility. Mismanaged waste travels the currents with wind, or there's leakage, or there's pollution, or there's litter, actual mismanagement or intentional mismanagement of it. And that becomes somebody else's problem. And to have this disconnect where it can be spread everywhere, but then managed on a lower level becomes a real systemic problem. Next slide. So there is no one solution. And where we're seeing that plastic is now managed at a local level, it is addressing every sustainability goal. Now, here's a picture of all of the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And every goal is related to plastic and access to water, water security. If you don't have clean water to drink, you will be dependent on bottled water. If you don't have access to other materials, your economy is different. You're going to have a problem with you're going to be dependent on the plastic that is available and the material that's available. And as you go through here, this is just to demonstrate how all of the sustainability goals are related, with the bottom tier being ocean and land conservation, ocean and land sustainability, and all of the other barriers are related to those. And then the reason that that's referred to as the wedding cake, the reason that this is important is I'm getting amazing sunlight as the sun is rising right here. As we go up on this tier, you start to see how all of the sustainability goals are related. These barriers are related to plastic pollution. And it is as we address within our communities these barriers and these sustainability goals, we start to see the related policies that could be put in place to support those communities addressing each one of these sustainability goals and its barriers. Next slide. I showed this. This is a diagram, a systems diagram of the impact of farming and all of the policies in there. And I show this simply that it is complicated. The world is complicated and everything has an impact. We are all interconnected. A decision I make will impact a community next door. It will impact countries across the ocean, across the Atlantic, across the Pacific. And to see this, when you see the complexity of how things are interconnected, you start to see why you cannot just put one solution, and you can't have just one legislation, one policy to fix everything when there are multiple levels of impact, interconnections, and different degrees of impact. Next slide. And then I will pass it over to Mark. And so that was just to give you a sense of how complex our plastic pollution is. It is very much interconnected with every sustainability goal, how it is interconnected. We are all interconnected, and it is on a community level that we are addressing the sustainability goals. And we're reaching a point of, well, then what support can we have from the top down to address the sustainability, the barriers and the challenges we have at a community level? What are those policies? And then Mark will talk about how that global treaty works.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, to give you a bit of a context of this global treaty and where it came from, and why we think it's so important for us to be talking about this. About 1.5 years ago, with Plastic Ocean, we started to be involved in an initiative called the Global treaty dialogues, which was a civil society and private sector dialogue with the focus of preparing us, all the people involved, towards this possible global treaty that was going to be voted this year, 2022, at the end of February. But of course, this whole project didn't came to be just in February 2022. This is something that was in the making already since 2014, when the first UN Environmental Assembly came together, and they put on the agenda for the first time, okay, plastic pollution, or ocean plastic pollution, I think it was what they put on the agenda. Like, hey, it seems that we're having an issue here with ocean plastic pollution. We need to know more. But as you probably all understand and know, that these big global UN processes are very slow. So it took them a few environmental sessions for them to really come to the point of voting on a resolution. So first of all, they put it on the agenda, then they investigated it a bit more, and so on, until this year at the UN Environmental Assembly in Nairobi. It was the Assembly number 5. A resolution was put up for vote. But before they put this resolution up for a vote, 3 different proposals were discussed in the week before, with different focuses. Each country, of course, can send in a proposal to the UN for a possible vote. In this case, there was a proposal from Rwanda and Peru, which was the main proposal that was taken and negotiated the week before the Environmental Assembly, with a more holistic approach towards plastic pollution, and not only ocean plastic pollution or a treaty only about marine debris. So we're very happy, at least as our organization, we're more focused on the entire plastic life cycle, that this is in fact part of the current resolution that is being negotiated. So out of these 3 proposals, the main one was the Rwanda-Peru one, which now is moving forward. And luckily, out of the 193 countries who are part of the UN, 175 countries voted in favor of this resolution at the end of February this year. So that was a huge win for the environment and for organizations like ours, who have been working for the last few years to end plastic pollution, and do it, as Julie already told you before, do it in the most systemic way possible. Of course, when the UN started talking about, the UN Environmental Assembly started talking about plastic pollution, it was only a ocean related issue. It was only a waste management problem. It was only a end of life issue. But fortunately, the last few years, we have found out that as we use plastic in so many different sectors and in so many different parts of the world, we cannot just consider plastic pollution as an end of life solution. So the recognition of the problem has been a lot broader than it used to be, and thank God, one of the main how can I say this? One of the main recommendations from this resolution is that we have to look at it also from a point of view from sustainable design. And not just, okay, we generate waste, how do we better manage waste? We need to look for different design, different products. For instance, single-use plastic, it's a design problem. It's not a use problem. If we design products in a better way so they can be multiple use, we fix the problem immediately of a waste management problem. Next slide, please. So just to have an idea about this resolution, and I just want to make sure that everybody understands, right now, there is no global plastics treaty. Yeah, so, okay, there was a big celebration at the end of February because a resolution was passed, but in the end, a resolution is just a document indicating what are the rules of engagement? What do we really want to talk about in the next couple of years when all these countries with their own interests are going to negotiate this global plastics treaty, or in some places they rather like to call it an instrument and not so much a treaty, because that is still being negotiated as we speak. So what this resolution in the end contains are, for instance, different provisions to make sure that we all agree on, okay, what is exactly this problem and what do we need to include in the next couple of years to make sure what is really the problem that we need to solve. And that is why it was so important that out of these three proposals, the Rwanda-Peru proposal was voted upon as the most complete proposal, because that proposal talked about a comprehensive approach towards the full life cycle of plastic, from extraction until end of life management. So to make sure we don't just try to solve the problem of plastic on our beaches and in the ocean, but also all the plastic leakage that occurs in the entire life cycle of plastic, from the creation of a pallet, from shipping all those pallets to factories worldwide, and all the plastic pallet spills that occur on the open ocean that happens in factories, and also, of course, plastic waste that is being generated after consumers use these products. So it's very important that we consider the full life cycle of plastic, and this is part of the resolution as well. Another part, and there's 16 in total, 16 provisions in total. Today we're going to talk about only about 7 of them. So I invite everyone, we're going to send that later on in the chat so you can download the resolution yourself and see all the other provisions of the resolution. For now, one of the maybe even most important provisions of the resolution talks about, you know, we need to promote sustainable production and consumption of plastics. Right now, a lot of solutions are focused on how do we consume, and it sounds a bit weird, but how do we use plastic in a better way? But also we need to produce plastic in a different way and use it for different products that cannot be single use. So we need to go and focus more on a circular economy approach. Unfortunately, today is not a masterclass about circular economy. Otherwise, we could be talking about this for another hour. But in the end, what does circular economy focus on is making sure that any material doesn't lose value. It can be reused over and over again. That design is a very important part of that, to make sure that everything is being designed to be able to be recycled, repaired, reused, etc. To make sure that plastic stays in the system and doesn't leave to a landfill or to the environment. So this circular economy approach is very important as well, a part of this resolution. We also need to talk about, and this is something that I heard many times in the conversations we had in the global treaty dialogues last year, is, okay, so if we start working on reducing plastic pollution and production from now on and avoid plastic pollution in marine environment, so what happens with all the plastic pollution that is already there? We cannot just focus on the future if we don't take care of the plastic pollution that has been generated and already causing huge problems worldwide. So one of the provisions says it needs to include existing plastic pollution. Some parts of the world are so heavily contaminated that we need to create a system, finance, technology, whatever, to make sure that there is some kind of decontamination process included in the global treaty. So this is very important as well. Also, that's point 4 in this slide. We need to implement and update national action plans that reflect country-driven approaches. We need to specify reporting and also periodically measure progress, because it's very easy to talk about we need to recycle better, we have to implement the best technology available, but we know that globally there are very big differences between one country and another. Some countries produce all the plastic waste and other countries receive all the plastic waste. And many of the countries that receive plastic waste, unfortunately, are not the countries with the capabilities of processing all this waste. And in the end, that's where plastic pollution happens. If you look, for instance, just to use an example, on a global map of plastic waste generation, and you will go and look for United States, for instance, they're not a big plastic polluter. They're not the ones who maybe are causing that all the plastic ends up in the ocean. Why is that? It's because most of plastic waste from the United States is being shipped to other countries where this plastic pollution happens. And of course, this is just an example. We can give exactly the same example for the Netherlands, for instance. As a matter of fact, just a report came out like 2 weeks ago that the Netherlands is one of the biggest plastic exporters in the world. About 70 million tons of plastic waste is being shipped from the Netherlands, and it's not all plastic waste generated in the Netherlands, but it's being shipped through the Netherlands to other countries to process. So again, if we talk about national action plans, we need to talk about national action plans that are equal. And that needs to reflect country different approaches. Some countries are not at the same level as other countries. So we need to help them. And also we need to specify reporting, better reporting. Right now, almost no reporting exists. So we need to make sure that all countries that are part of the UN will work on that, and also periodically measure progress, because that's what we're seeing right now with the Paris Agreement. A lot of countries send in their national action plans. It sounds really nice, very ambitious, but there is no progress because it's not being measured, because it's in many cases voluntary approaches and action plans. So next of the provisions is not next slide. Point 5 of this current slide. We also need to encourage collaborative action by all stakeholders. I think, yeah, we're beyond the point of blaming. Governments are not doing enough. Companies are not doing enough. Consumers are not educated enough. In the end, we need to collaborate, and we're all part of this problem. So we really need to work together to make sure. We cannot expect governments to take legislative actions when civil society is not ready, or companies cannot implement innovation if there's no incentive for them to compete in the market with normal single-use virgin plastic products, for instance. So we need to make sure that we all work on this, and of course a panel or a masterclass that we're having today is exactly because of that. We need to make sure that we all know about this global treaty, and we all know what it means, so we can take collaborative action. And not only on a global scale, I think this is also very important to mention, and this is being mentioned in the provisions of the current resolution. It needs to be collaboration on a national level, on a regional level, and also on a global level. Because if not, anything that happens on a local level, in a local community, will never end up being taken serious enough for solutions on a global scale. So point 6 is more about, again, a bit going back to the national action plans. Of course, we can write the best national action plans, but to point 6, if we don't have any capacity in certain countries, if we don't have technical assistance, if we don't have any transfer of technology or financial assistance, we cannot clean up the current mess that we already have. We cannot expect countries to have higher recycling rates. And we can also not expect that, for instance, universities who train our future leaders and professionals are teaching about the circular economy. So we need to make sure that all these countries also, again, work together, collaborate, and make sure that there are certain programs in place to have this exchange of capacity, technical assistance, technology, and also financial assistance. Without financial assistance, we won't make a dent in the current plastic pollution crisis. And last but not least, really important, we need to increase knowledge through awareness raising. That's what we're doing today, especially for us. It's very important. Part of our educational efforts is not only educating about plastic pollution, but it's also educating about the different solutions that are available right now. And we think that a global treaty is one of those solutions. But of course, if I look to the current reality in South America, or specifically Chile, where I live, education is really still very limited to education about recycling. So again, there we still have a big knowledge gap, and we need to accelerate the level of change in education that is right now offered in schools all around the country and the world. Next slide, please. So these provisions are more focused on what this global treaty should contain. But there's also something that the resolution right now mentions is more about, okay, what are the considerations for the Intergovernmental Negotiation Commission, sorry. So this is the commission that is going to be negotiating this treaty in the next couple of years. And these are some guidelines that they need to take in consideration to make sure that this global treaty, on one hand, will be ambitious, but also will take care of the problem. So there are a few of these considerations. I'm only mentioning 4 here for now. And one of those considerations, which I already mentioned a bit in the slide, the slide before this one, it was there needs to be a flexibility that allows country discretion in implementation of their commitments, taking into account national circumstances. We cannot compare Germany with Indonesia, just to give you an example. We need to make sure that there are many, many big differences between one country and the other. We need to take into account that some countries really need to catch up, and we need to help them with that. And we need to consider a certain transition period, let me put it that way, to make sure that these countries can catch up. Again, the need for a financial mechanism to support the implementation. Even if all these countries have a big ambition, but there's no financial support of the implementation, nothing's going to happen. It's one of the things that Julie and I found out when we were in Lisbon for the UN Ocean Conference a few months ago, where we saw that there was a big presence of the global north, but almost no presence of global south because of the lack of financing. If there cannot even be country representatives in these instances, like a UN Ocean Conference, or very soon the first round of negotiations in Uruguay in November, that's not a level, that's not an equal playing field. So we need to make sure that everybody can be part of the conversation now, but also, of course, a financial mechanism to make sure, like we also have for the Paris Agreement, then we need global funds for countries to make sure that they can access those funds and help themselves. A third point is that we need to use the best available science, but also traditional knowledge. This is, I think, very interesting, especially when we look at the circular economy. Circular economy is embedded in traditional knowledge. Indigenous people, and we ourselves a few hundred years ago, used to understand traditional knowledge and how nature works. Circular economy in the end is just a copy and an approach to what nature does, where nothing goes to waste, where waste doesn't exist. So we need to access available science about the current state of our environment and plastic pollution, but we also need to go back and find traditional knowledge of indigenous people and local knowledge systems. I think we can all agree that somebody who lives in Colombia knows a lot better its local situation and reality than somebody who lives in Europe. So we need to empower local communities and local knowledge systems. And 2.4, especially in the global south, the informal and cooperative settings. The informal waste sector in Chile, in Colombia, and many other countries, also in Africa and Southeast Asia, the informal sector right now is what makes the circular economy move. If we talk about, in this case, Chile, where I live, we have about a 9.6% recycling rate. But that is industrial recycling and domestic recycling. Domestic recycling in Chile is only 1.6%. And that is mainly thanks to the informal sector. The people that come to your house or your building and pick up and go through your containers that you park once a week on the street, and they take the cardboard boxes and they take the aluminum cans and they take the plastic bottles and try to make a living by selling it to local recycling companies. That is the reality of most countries in the global south. And those are the local lessons that we need to take in account if we want to make a successful transition towards, first of all, a global treaty, but also end plastic pollution, hopefully as soon as possible. Next slide, please. Okay, so
Mark,
this looks
just to, if you wanted to, because it's a lot to digest, I just wanted to like take a breath, see if anybody like had some, maybe just some engagement, see if anybody has any questions. I mean, it is a lot to take in, and I just to like recap some, like, it is complicated, and it sounds sad because there's like always over representation of like the global south, north over the south. There's going to be multinational corporations that are more represented, but it is it's promising because, well, there's organizations like Plastic Oceans, and there's organizations like us really working to include those voices of the community. And it is like what Mark said, it really is. Plastic pollution is a sustainability issue, which means that it is addressed at a community level. We are adapting our needs to it. Sustainability meaning that we have to meet our needs. This is economic, social, environmental, without compromising future generations' capability to meet their needs. And that is at a local level. And that's why we have the inclusion. And so much of what, if I were to just recap and give everybody a chance to like ask any questions, it is really, we're looking for collaboration, and it's important to have collaboration because this isn't an education, a linear process. We are all learning together. This is not, no one person, no one body has all of the answers. This is why we need to hear everybody's voices. That is where the collaboration is. We need to hear where the problems lie so that we can ensure that policies are put into place to cover those voices. Systems are created to make sure there's value. If there's value in the material, I assure you, everybody brings it back. The reason people will keep sending it somewhere else is because they don't see value. I always use the example of money. Money is made out of plastic. Nobody is throwing that away and not taking it back. Then that is the same type of support we need and regulations we need to create that circular economy to maintain and hold value for material. And then finally, what Mark was saying was reporting is so critical because it is accountability. All of the stakeholders, which we'll go into, stakeholders hold different accountability. The one individual down in Cambodia is very different than Coca-Cola, the CEO. They have different power, influence, and therefore they have different accountability, and reporting is so critical on that. So and we have some questions. Does every country have one or more members take part in the negotiations for the treaty? If yes, is there an official UN list? No,
I have never seen an official UN list.
Yeah, in theory, everyone is allowed to take part, but those that actively take part are the ones that have the loudest voices. So similar to the UN Ocean Conference, and I always use this example globally, 85% of the global population lives in the global south. Right now, 85% of the representation is in the global north. So you aren't hearing the half of the globe. I mean, 85% of the global population is not fully represented. You will always see the US, Germany, UK, lots of EU countries. You will very few African countries, South American countries, and Asian countries are present at most of these conferences and representation. And at the end of the day, it's simply because it's a financial barrier to fly people, to give up who's paying for it. It really does come down to costs of flights and hotels, shockingly.
Exactly. That's unfortunately a reality. And to the question, I don't know if those lists exist, and at least they're not public listings. I think if you Google country by country, you might find some people who represent their country. I know in the case of Chile, this is still to be decided. But I think, which is one issue that is very interesting to know before I go to talk about what you see on the screen right now, is until now, the presidency of the next period, of the negotiation period, has not been decided yet. But it's very highly likely that the presidency of the negotiation process will be in the hands of a South American country. Again, this has not been decided yet, but at least for talking about, to Julie's point, 85% of the population lives in the global south, but 85% of representation in these negotiations and international events are from the global north. I think having a global south presidency, let me put it that way, I think is a good step forward to make sure that the global south voices are represented and heard as well. So our reality, as I am in the global south, will be hopefully very present. So thank you for this little summary, Julie. Again, yeah, it's a lot of information. That's why we also made a short list of provisions and framework. Again, in the chat, you can see there's a link posted where you can download the entire resolution. Again, the resolution is not a treaty. It's just a framework that still needs to be negotiated. So as you can see on the screen, I don't know, Javier, maybe we can make that screen bigger, or I'll turn off my camera to make sure that everybody can read it.
Yes, absolutely. I will remove you from the spotlight, and Julie as well.
Okay, so there's a lot of text here, but let's go from top to bottom. We are right now in 2022, and we are going to have a process that hopefully is not going to last more than 2.5 years until the beginning of 2025, in which there will be, as you can see, February 2022, UNEA 5.2, that's where the resolution was voted. And from February 2022 until November 2022, there are some process going on, like, for instance, choosing the presidency, choosing to making sure that there will be an agenda on the first intergovernmental negotiating committee meeting at the end of November this year in Uruguay. So that will be the first instance in where all these countries will be represented to negotiate these different provisions that I presented a bit before. In total, there will be 5 international intergovernmental negotiating commissions meetings until the end of 2024. And by then, we need to have a final text for the treaty, which will be voted upon in 2025, in the first half of 2025, in the Diplomatic Plenipotentiary Conference, which is UNEA 6, the next Environmental Assembly. Yeah, so we only have 2.5 years. So this is in the end the message I want to give to all of you. We only have 2.5 years to negotiate and to make sure that all our voices are heard and included, to come up with a text for a final treaty. And then we need to hope, of course, that first of all, this text will be including a systematic approach to plastic pollution that will include the entire life cycle of plastic, and hopefully also promote on a global level the circular economy. How all these different solutions need to come together country by country, that's something that countries need to decide after this global treaty comes into effect. Okay, so there are opportunities. Time is flying, and against what in general people believe about the United Nations and these global processes, which are very slow and they are being negotiated behind closed doors and nobody understands what is really being talked about. Well, this time it's different, and we cannot sleep the next couple of years, because we need to be very active, very aware, and very on top of this process to make sure that, first of all, the text for the treaty will be a very complete one, including all the provisions that I just mentioned, but also, of course, very practical solutions. And also after that, we need to make sure that we hold all countries accountable for their own national action plans to make sure that they're also ambitious. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the part of the masterclass that we enter a little bit more in discussion. We still have 15 minutes left. And that's where I want to ask Julie, and you can see on this on the screen, there's a whole list of already, practical solutions that we've been developing and seeing all around the world the last few years. But so why do we need a global treaty if countries already are working on these solutions? Companies are working on circular economy, eco-design, we're cleaning up beaches, we have the ocean cleanup, cleaning up the ocean supposedly, we have plastic bag bans. Why do we need a treaty? Is it not complicating everything?
Well, where I like this concept, one, I think fundamentally, if we imagine you live in a community that has all the perfect laws in place, innovations in place to manage your community and its waste. The one thing that we know is that as people travel, tourists travel in and out, you're going to get waste that doesn't belong to you, that you're not necessarily responsible for. You will continue to have waste. There is the environmental aspects of currents, wind, that also cause pollution to come and go into your community. So even if you take that community and call it a country, Japan has they're able to recycle extremely efficiently. However, it only takes one typhoon for all of the waste from the Philippines to blow over into Japan. This is not, you can say, oh, well, then Philippines needs to figure it out. They simply do not have the resources and the finances for an infrastructure at a developed country level like the US or Japan. And so it does become this disconnect between how do we then regulate, how do we recognize that we do live in one global society, one global planet, and how do we then make it so that it is fair enough for each country to manage their own waste and their own material resources. And so as we start thinking of that, you start thinking of the life cycle, and then on just a simple scale, if you think simply life cycle from, us extracting natural resources to oil to make plastic, the producers create plastic products, they produce it, they produce the products, they distribute to consumers, we consume it. We consume it in our location, our community, we throw it away, and then it's that local government who is responsible for figuring out what to do, whether they burn it, landfill it, just put it to the side, or it's mismanaged. It's recycled, but there's different degrees of recycling. So that is the life cycle. Now you start to see, well, how is it that the producer can produce endless amounts, but now you have struggling communities with all different capacities to manage the waste are now supposed to figure it out alone. Why are they more accountable than the producer? And so it really you start to see, you feel that it's not fair. and that's really where these laws are. Let's place some accountability on this. Fair accountability and responsibility on those that are contributing to the volume of plastic, as well as the volume of bad plastics. Some plastics are better than others. Some plastics are more recyclable than others. And so then we start to question, what are those better plastics? Who is more accountable? Who is more responsible? If we all take in our part, I know probably many of you are willing individuals to modify your lifestyle, reduce the amount of plastic, but at some point you can only do so much if the laws are not in place. So part of this discussion is when we talk about different bills and bans, I think I saw somebody come in here with an EPR. Will it even be possible to get increased EPR? So in a global accountability process. So EPR stands for Extended Producer Responsibility. This sounds great because it sounds like, okay, this is now putting some responsibility and accountability on the producer and how they make it. Now, right now, most of the EPR laws focus on recycling. So producers I'm going to throw Coca-Cola under the bus, as I always do, but Coca-Cola's like, hey, we're making everything out of recycled plastic. We've done our part. Last year we supported 5,000 trash cans in Mexico. We supported India on turning recycled bottles into their roads. This is still what they have done, is they've changed the conversation to where it's not them changing. It's them saying, yeah, we're supporting the local communities to do what they're supposed to do. They continue to put the responsibility on the consumer, on the community. And again, the community can only do so much without some support of some equal playing rules across the globe. And if we don't start to recognize the shift in how the discourse is, we will always start to put all of the solutions downstream where it is on the consumer. And we have educated the consumer. We have focused on recycling for decades. We can only do so much if those upstream, the producers, don't start to change their how they produce it, how they make it, and that they're incentivized to take it back and reuse it themselves. See,
to the point of one of the questions is, could there be a global, the global accountability, where is it? Yeah, will it even be possible to get increased EPR in a global accountability process?
yes.
I guess that would be a very interesting challenge, as EPR right now is being implemented on a national level. So first of all, the countries are trying to close the national loop and the national plastic loop to make sure that plastic doesn't escape the system. And the accountability goes to the companies that, for instance, you put 100 tons of plastic in the market, you need to recover, I don't know, depending on the ambition of the country, you need to recover 9%, and next year you need to recover 11, then you need to recover 13. But in the end, right now, that is in general promoting more recycling. And we know that plastic production on a global level is growing so fast, a lot faster than recycling rates that we see right now on a global scale, that EPR right now, I think, is the best bet we have on a national level. But clearly it's too late for some countries to hop on the EPR train, let me put it that way. And we need to really focus on reduction. We cannot just keep producing what we have and better manage it, because production is going so fast, and EPR generally is limited to certain products, to, for instance, packaging, which we know is single-use packaging is 40 to 50% globally. We know that, but there's 50% of other plastics as well. Some plastics are single-use, other plastics are, of course, in construction, for instance, is plastic that is being used for many years and decades. But EPR cannot be the solution for all sectors that use plastics.
And part of the global treaty is to support a circular economy. And what does that mean? And part of that circular economy, one of the first steps is recognizing which plastics are problematic and never be recycled. An example is styrofoam. I forgot what the regular name is, but the styrofoam it can never be recycled. I don't care what anybody says. It is never going to hold value and be recycled. So creating a list of problematic, unnecessary plastics versus plastics that hold value, that are, found in your car, in airplanes, medical devices and things, eyeglasses. There are certain types of plastics. Separating those two automatically increases the recycling capabilities by removing those that are just problematic. And there are lists out there. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation pushes for these national plastic pacts dialogues that we're part of, and that is a critical first step. And so that will help support that circular economy. I think Vinath was saying, just to touch on what you said, Mark, and recyclability. How many times can plastics be recycled? Endlessly, if they are good plastics. If they are problematic plastics, wrappers for chips or sweets and whatnot, they do not have recycling capability, like endless capabilities. They have one maybe recycling path to packing peanuts, and ultimately it's just delaying the inevitable, which is toxic plastic material.
Exactly. I mean, looking at the time, we only have about a few minutes left. So I really would like to ask you the last question, or discuss the last question that I saw in the group. And the question is from Micaela. And she asked, how can the people around the world influence or be part of the negotiations if they don't know the representatives who are at the negotiation meetings? I would like to give the first part of the answer. Maybe you can complement that, Julie. One of the things that we did as Plastic Oceans, first of all, of course, we participated in this global dialogue, but that was still a group for experts, company leaders, and people from ministries. but there are being held in a few countries, and in Chile we did the same. We did some country dialogues as well. We wrote a report with all these sectors being involved, and there was also civil society there. We wrote a report and we offered it to the Ministry of Environment, and we know that this is happening in each country, where now each country have to come to the negotiation table in November, which is in 2 months, in case we forgot that. In 2 months, each country has to come to the negotiation table with the position they have as a country. What is their ambition and what do they want to get out of this global treaty? Some countries already know their position, but many countries don't. So I think this is the moment, if you have the possibility to contact your Ministry of Environment and ask them if they have an open work group, for instance, to talk about the plastic treaty, or you can send in a letter or call a representative and ask them, okay, what is our position? I think that is the first question you should ask your representatives, okay, or Ministry of Environment. Probably who will go to those negotiating meetings will be the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who in the end negotiate these kind of international treaties. And ask them, okay, who can I talk to understand what is our position as a country regarding the global treaty? I think that is the first step, which is for us maybe as a global NGO a bit easier because we have been working in this space for many years already. But as a civilian, I would go straight to the Ministry of Environment. I think that would be the easiest step. Or ask them, what is your position? What has been your involvement in the global treaty? And start asking questions there.
I think, I mean, it's important to recognize that it is not, it's advocacy on this level is truly, there's a saying, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. It is just persistence. At the end of the day, they listen. It is not as much of a majority. There is not like equal representation. It is just constant pushing. It is relationship management, finding those who's going to get you to the table. And that is what at the end of the day, it just requires that constant pushing. And that is why when there is no, those that are underrepresented or in a lower economic demographic, you just don't have the capacity, the finances, you have other things to worry about. You don't have the capacity to be able to just push and push and push to make sure that there is representation. And where it is very helpful to reach out to your local ministry and environment, but you have to do it nonstop. And that is why it is finding that local organizations that are being built to have the capacity to do that nonstop. We are one of the Plastic Oceans, and this is not even, I don't mean to like endorse us, but we are one of the only international organizations pushing to represent communities on a global level where we are focused on plastic pollution. We have World Wildlife Fund and Nature Conservancy, Ocean Conservancy that are also at the table, but they also have multiple other agendas. But we are the only one really representing on a community level. We're grassroots focused to ensure that we are at the table and constantly pushing for that. And it's really through that support and how you can rally people is like really educating and getting people on board to support. If it's not an organization like Plastic Oceans, it's supporting one of the blue communities, the organizations locally that are just tirelessly working to make sure that their voices are heard.
Exactly. I think it's a big challenge. We've been seeing also this living the example of, okay, how do we know? First of all, our work is, okay, what is the agenda? What are they going to talk about in November? How can we prepare ourselves? How can we ask our followers, you who are in today's webinar, but also the people we work with, how can we ask them the right questions so we can take their answers to, well, we are not the ones who will be negotiating, but we will be in direct contact with the people who negotiate in certain countries. We need to prepare ourselves. We need to ask those questions. We are the ones who generate these spaces of dialogue, for instance, like the national treaty dialogues that we did over here in Chile, and we hope to repeat in other countries as well. but that's where we come in, and we hope we can even, you know, in our Blue Communities program, we work with small communities, we work with island communities. Those voices need to be heard at this global level. What we try to do as well at the UN Oceans Conference, because those are the real realities and not the conference room realities of plastic pollution. So that's a bit what we work for and how we want these voices to be heard. Before we end this masterclass, and we could be talking about this for hours and hours, it's so very interesting, and we're very happy that everybody has been sharing their opinions and questions with us in the chat room. But before we finish, next slide, please. In case, well, I mean, we've been thinking about the Rethink Plastic system, but maybe we can skip that, Julie, as the time is already running out. If you want to dive in a bit deeper in the complexity of plastic pollution, but also how to change and work on global solutions, these are just 3 reports that I'm sharing. Maybe, Javier, you can spotlight only the main, the slideshow, please. Here you go. 3 reports that I recommend. One is the Global Plastics Outlook by the OECD. Really interesting report that talks about, okay, what happens with plastic pollution if we continue business as usual? What happens with plastic pollution if we implement current plans, and how can we be more collaborative and ambitious to have a systematic approach? And they talk about policy packages to make sure that we really end plastic pollution as soon as possible. The other one is about primary microplastics, a really interesting report that doesn't talk about typical packaging. It talks about plastic pollution by microplastics, primary microplastics. And the last report, really interesting, is the truth behind trash and how waste is being exported all around the globe, which is also something that we need to take care of within this global treaty. Last but not least, after thanking you all for being here at this masterclass, I also would like to invite every one of you, next slide please, for tomorrow's panel within our Trees and Seas Festival. Tomorrow we have a really interesting panel about young environmental leaders. So if you're interested in that, you can, let me see if we can share here it is. Inscriptions for tomorrow's webinar has been posted within the chat, so you can click that link and register yourself for tomorrow's panel. Again, thank you very much for being here with us in this masterclass, and we hope to keep informing you about this global treaty process that is taking place right now until 2025. Thank you very much, and thank you for being with us.
Excellent. Thank you. And then, Gabrielle, let me see if I can